You know, Alex, there's a very specific kind of silence in a house when you turn the main water valve back on after a repair. It's that 5 second window where you're just holding your breath, waiting to hear if you've turned your basement into an indoor swimming pool.
I've seen that look on your face, Tiger. It's less master craftsman and more man praying to the gods of surface tension.
Guilty as charged. But honestly, that's the beauty and the curse of copper. When it's done right, it looks like jewelry and lasts 100 years. When it's done wrong, well, water's a very honest critic. It'll find the one microscopic pinhole you missed while you were distracted by a moth flying into your torch flame.
Which is exactly why we're doing this. People are terrified of soldering. I think it's the combination of I might burn the house down and I might flood the house out. It's a double threat DIY task.
It's the fire that gets people. They see that blue cone of flame and think they need to be a certified welder. But really, soldering, or sweating as the old timers call it, is more like chemistry class. It's all about capillary action. You're not melting the pipe, you're just inviting the solder to a party inside the joint.
Always the romantic, inviting it to a party. Okay, so before we invite anyone anywhere, let's talk about the gear. Because I see people buying these massive kits, and then I see you with a little pencil torch. What does a person actually need to get a leak-free joint?
It's a short list, actually. You need a decent tubing cutter. Don't even think about using a hacksaw unless you want a joint that looks like a chewed up piece of gum. You need a fitting brush, some grit cloth, essentially sandpaper on a roll, a tub of flux, and lead-free solder. And the torch, of course. Propane is fine for most home stuff. MAP gas is hotter and faster, but it's also easier to accidentally cook your flux if you aren't paying attention.
Wait, cook your flux? That sounds like a bad Sunday brunch.
It's worse. If you overheat the joint, the flux turns into this black, crusty carbon layer. Once that happens, the solder won't stick to the copper anymore. It just beads up and rolls off like water on a freshly waxed car. If you see that black char, you're done. You have to take it all apart, let it cool, and start the cleaning process from scratch.
Okay, let's back up to the cleaning, because every pro I've ever talked to says the same thing. It's all in the prep. Is it really that critical? Can I just wipe the thumbprints off and call it a day?
Absolutely not. If the copper isn't bright enough to see your reflection in, it's not clean enough. You're fighting oxidation. Copper starts rusting the second it hits the air. It just turns brown instead of red. Solder's picky. It wants to bond with pure copper molecules, not a layer of grime or oily fingerprints from that ham sandwich you ate at lunch. You scrub the outside of the pipe until it's pink and glowing, and you scrub the inside of the fitting until it's just as bright. If you skip this, the joint might hold for a week, but the first time a water hammer hits that pipe, it'll pop right off.
So, bright and shiny is the goal. Then comes the flux. I've seen people paint it on like they're frosting a cupcake, and others who barely use a drop. What's the Goldilocks amount?
You want a thin, even coat. Think of it like a primer for paint. You apply it to the pipe and the inside of the fitting. Its job is to keep the copper from oxidizing again while you're heating it up. But, and this is a big one, don't get it inside the pipe where the water flows if you can help it. Clean off the excess on the outside after you push the pieces together. If you leave a big glob of flux sitting there, it'll actually corrode the pipe over time.
So, we've got clean pipe, we've got flux joints, everything is pushed together. Now we get to the scary part, the fire. Where do you actually aim that thing? Because I see people heating the solder itself, which seems wrong.
That is the number one mistake. It's like trying to cook a steak by heating the fork. You want the pipe and the fitting to be the heat source. You aim the inner blue tip of the flame right at the middle of the fitting hub, the thick part where the pipe is shoved inside. Copper is a fantastic heat conductor. It'll pull that heat right into the joint. You keep the flame moving, a little back and forth, like you're tickling the metal.
And how do you know when it's soup yet? Do you have a timer in your head?
No, you just test it. Every few seconds, you touch the solder to the opposite side of the joint from where the flame is. When the copper is hot enough to melt the solder on contact, the solder will suddenly just vanish. It gets sucked into the joint like a thirsty sponge. That's the capillary action doing the work. You don't need to wrap the solder a dozen times around the pipe either. For a half-inch pipe, you only need about half an inch of solder.
That's it? Just a little half-inch piece? I've seen joints that look like they have a silver scarf wrapped around them.
Yeah, that's over soldering. It makes a mess. It wastes money, and it can actually form big stalactites of solder inside the pipe that disrupt water flow. One of my early mistakes was thinking more is better. I ended up with a silver puddle on the floor, and a joint that leaked anyway because I'd overheated the whole thing trying to melt a mountain of lead.
Okay, let's talk about the nightmare scenario. You're in a tight spot, maybe under a sink or near a floor joist. You're sweating the joint, everything looks good. You turn the water on, and drip, drip, drip. What's the move? Can you just hit it with the torch again and add more solder?
I wish. If it leaks, there's usually a reason. Maybe there was a drop of water in the pipe. If there's even a thimbleful of water near that joint, it'll turn to steam and create a pinhole in the solder as it tries to escape. You can't just patch a soldered joint while it's wet. You have to drain the line completely, dry it out, take the joint apart, re-clean the now crusty copper, and do the whole dance over again. It's the universe's way of telling you to be more patient next time.
Speaking of water in the pipe, that's the hardest part for beginners, right? You turn off the main, but the house still has all this residual water sitting in the lines. If that water is sitting at the bottom of the joint you're trying to heat, you're basically trying to boil the ocean before you can melt the solder.
Exactly. It's impossible. I've spent 20 minutes wondering why my torch wasn't working, only to realize there was a slight trickle coming from a leaky shutoff valve 3 floors up.
I've heard the old white bread trick for that. Does that actually work, or is that just a prank plumbers play on apprentices?
No, it's a classic for a reason. You take a piece of plain white bread, no crusts, mind you, and you stuff it into the pipe. It acts like a temporary dam to stop that annoying trickle. You solder your joint, and then when you turn the water back on, the bread just dissolves and flushes out the faucet. Just make sure you take the aerator off the sink first, or you'll be cleaning soggy sourdough out of your faucet screen for the next hour.
I can see the headline, Local Man Clogs Kitchen Sink with Sandwich. What about vertical pipes? Gravity is a thing. Doesn't the solder just run down the pipe and fall off?
You'd think so, but capillary action is actually stronger than gravity in a tight space. That fitting is machined to have just a few thousandths of an inch of clearance. When the flux gets hot, it creates a vacuum of sorts. It'll pull the solder uphill just as easily as it pulls it sideways. The key on a vertical pipe is to heat the fitting, not the pipe below it. You want the solder to climb toward the heat.
Okay, I have to ask about the smooth wipe. You see pros take a damp rag and wipe the joint right after they're done. Is that just for aesthetics, or does it do something?
A bit of both. It cleans off the leftover flux so it doesn't green up the pipe later, and it smooths out the solder for a clean, professional look. But, and this is vital, don't move the pipe while the solder is still liquid. If you jiggle it while it's cooling, you get what's called a cold joint. It looks grainy and dull, and it's structurally weak. You want to see that solder go from a mirror shine liquid to a solid satin finish before you touch it.
So patience is the secret ingredient.
Patience and a fire-resistant mat. Don't be the guy who starts a fire in the wall because he was too focused on a perfect bead of solder and didn't notice the 2x4 behind the pipe was smoldering. I keep a spray bottle of water nearby, not for the pipe, but for the house.
Good tip. Before we wrap up, what's the one tigerism for someone who is about to light their torch for the first time?
Don't overthink the heat. Most people are so afraid of not getting it hot enough that they blast it until the copper turns purple and the flux is screaming. Just watch the colors. When that copper starts to get that slight rainbow hue and the flux begins to sizzle and disappear, you're in the zone. It's a dance, not a demolition.
Well, I feel approximately 40% more confident and 60% more likely to keep a loaf of Wonder Bread in my toolbox.
That's a healthy ratio. Just remember, if the water stays inside the copper and the floor stays dry, you've won.
Thanks for joining us in the den. Now go fix that leak before your basement becomes a koi pond.
And maybe buy the bread first, just in case.